Yeah.
So I'll have to.
Ta-da.
All right. So I explained this before we went live because I didn't know how technology works. Last month, we a few authors got together and we started the Ill Will writing show. And then there was some scheduling conflicts, so we changed it to the Right Back to Books world building show. And today we have Katie Reed here with us to talk about world building and everything she's learned on her personal journey of diving into creating worlds. So,
Hi.
hi.
Um, yeah, so I've been published in two anthologies, which are here. That I don't know if they're on the camera now or not, but um, one of them we did fairy tale retellings. One of them we did academy fiction, and then there was one. It's not available on the market anymore, but it was called Last Words anthology when you play with magic, and um, that's actually like a short story that's available for download later. But
How long have you been writing?
um, my my mom would tell you that I've been making up stories since I was a kid. Um, I wrote I made my first attempt at writing a book when I was 13, and then I filled up lots of notebooks through middle school and high school, and then I started actually trying to pursue a career as an author about 7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So,
How
just
is that?
way at
Because I have been
it.
writing for my entire life, like you said, but
Mhm.
I only just started taking myself seriously within the past couple of years. How has the past 7 years been for you? What was that like?
Well, um, that feeling that you don't know what you're doing hasn't gone away, which is like, it's like the most disappointing part. Um, but I mean, it feels good. It feels good to know that you're doing something that you're passionate about. Um, and it feels good to have found something that I have stayed passionate about for that long. So that's been good.
Have you, because I know Lindsay's been published traditionally and done the independent thing.
hmm
What about you?
So I have just done independent with. Sorry, my computer keeps coming plugged and unplugged.
Oh, perfect.
There we go. Um, I've just been doing self-published so far. I thought for a long time that I was gonna just try to go straight traditional.
Oh no, we lost
Is
Katie.
changing.
So my connection or your connection or something cut out and I didn't actually hear what you said. Do you mind repeating yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can. No,
Okay.
like everything froze for a second. And I was like, oh
Oh,
no.
okay.
Yeah.
so so refresh my mind about what we're talking about. Oh, the publishing, the independent
Yes.
part. Yes. So I thought I would still love to do traditional publishing. Um, and it's like in the future on the horizon, I always figured that it was something that it was like the way I was going to go. But current publishing and marketing trends are like everybody's going hybrid now. So, yeah, yeah, you gotta go where the people are doing the stuff,
Yeah.
Um, but
So
I like the traditional publishing aspect of things because I think that's like the stereotypical you've made it as an author. But the self-publishing has a lot of perks too, you know. So
I've only ever been independent And I've heard a lot of like, well, technically, the traditional route is the way to go because they just like hand you a stack of money and then you don't do anything else and you're like, we're good to go. But
Hmm.
from several several different episodes on the same writing podcast, so it might be a little biased. I've heard different authors say like they hit mainstream success being an independent author, and then when the traditional publishing houses got a hold of them, they were like, but I'm making more money off of my royalties this way. So there's been an interesting paradigm shift for sure.
Yeah, and it really is different depending on what you write, what you want to write, whether or not you want to work with an agent, how much of your marketing you want to do, um, how much control you want to have over your book. Because I'm familiar with several like author horror stories where they've been traditionally published and they absolutely hated the cover, but they had no control over that because that was marketing department. So you definitely have a lot more control over the physical copy of your book as an independent author, and a lot of traditional publishing houses, unless you're like a unicorn story in the big five, you have to do your own marketing anyway. So,
I didn't know
independent pub
that.
yeah, I mean, independent publishing houses, smaller publishing companies, they don't have the financial push that they can give to an author necessarily. They can give them a platform. They can help connect them with opportunities through their network. But most of the authors that I know who have done traditional publishing are like, yeah, I still have to market my own book. So I'm like, well,
Okay.
right. Publishing companies are kind of losing their pull that way.
Because that I
Yeah.
thought was like the entire draw, like the whole reason. Because when I first started self publishing, I just kind of put a book out and let it float into the ether and didn't do anything with it.
Hmm.
And I realized like years later that I needed to be on social media and talking about my book in order for people to know it was there. And so it's I didn't realize that there's actually, like you said, unless it's the big five, you're kind of it's almost the same boat anyways.
Yeah. Well,
But
so Brandon Sanderson does lectures at BYU for creative writing, and he's a big fantasy sci-fi author. Um, he sort of has a unicorn story, and he tells people in his classes, he's like, you can make it as an author, you can, but you can't depend on a publishing company to do it for you,
mm,
because careers like mine, Brandon Sanderson saying this, he's like, careers like mine don't come along very often. They don't do book tours for every author that they sign. They don't do big release marketing pushes for every author they sign. Every author is not treated equal, not by a long shot.
mm.
And it depends on what you're writing and whether or not they think it'll sell.
So I guess the entertainment industry as a whole is just like the same thing, whether you're a writer or an actor or a musician. It's all kind of
Mm-hmm.
art
Yep.
is art, and oh, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
before we get into your journey with world building, because I'm just curious, who do you self publish through?
I self-publish through Tulip Poplar Publications. It's Michelle Wilson's. See if I can get the
Oh,
publishing
cool.
press. Yeah, it's how she publishes her books, and she's been kind enough to let to use like some of her ISBNs and stuff to help Lindsay and I get the anthologies together with her. So
Oh, that's excellent. I
yeah.
I was just curious because I know like the Amazon KDP publishing has been pretty popular. And I just recently discovered Draft to Digital, which is like expanded distribution, but it's pretty similar to Amazon. So it's pretty neat that you
Hmm.
actually like know a person, and that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and Michelle's super cool about all of it too, because we actually just now went over to Draft to Digital not too long ago and took one of our anthologies wide so that it can be on places that aren't just Amazon. And it made all that back end stuff super easy on her. So we were like, yay.
Woot. So when would you say you started building a different world in your
Building
writing?
a different world. So that really more came in with Paradoxes of Magi, which is the short story that I have out for free. I have an urban fantasy that I've worked on and off, and right now I'm on a break from it because I'm just mad at it. But there wasn't so much world building in that, and that's actually one of the reasons that I decided to go and start playing with different genres, because I was like, man, what is the point of having all these really cool, badass superheroes if they're stuck in this world? This world sucks. So I jumped into playing with magic systems with Paradoxes of Magi, and that's when I was like, okay. And it was actually, I had a dream, and I was like, man, that would make a really cool setting for a story. And then Lindsay was like, hey, would you be interested in doing an anthology thing? And I was like, yeah, I'll do an anthology thing, and I'll use this dream as a backdrop. And then it kind of turned into this whole, it was like, there's this idea and this idea and this idea. And oh, if I do this, then I have to also expand on that. So it turned into this whole thing.
Has it, because like you said, oh, and then I have to expand on that. How has it helped your writing as far as like being more in depth and stuff?
It gave me a lot of insight into the kinds of things that can sink a person into a book. If you've got great characters, you've probably got readers that are going to come along for the ride because they get invested in the characters. They want to know what happens to them. They're interested in the conflict. But to get a reader to really want to spend time in a place, you have to give them things like, what does it smell like? What does it look like? What is it, what's the feel? What does this, how is it similar to our world and how is it different? And that kind of has it's almost made me more observant as a person. I am not an observant person. I exist in my head most of the time, but now I'm more likely to be like, oh, that plant smells weird. Or, hey, look, that leaf has an interesting shape and it's got like little pokey things on it, and I'm like cataloging these things. Like I can put that in a story somewhere.
Amazing. I didn't even consider the fact of like, which I put it in there, but just that aspect of like smells and tastes and those other senses of things. How many books have you said it was the two anthologies and the short story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so even though you're frustrated with it, will you tell us about your urban fantasy?
So my urban fantasy is supposed to be sort of like X-Men meets Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Ooh.
Yeah, but Mr. and Mrs. Smith aren't working the way that I need them to. But it is essentially, our main character is Trinity and our male main character is Trenton, and I need to change their names because they're too similar, but that's where they are right now. And Trenton is a secret agent, and Trinity thinks that he works for the CIA, which is not necessarily a lie. It's just not the CIA that people think about whenever, it has like a different set of words associated with it. And he doesn't know that Trinity is a shapeshifter. And his job is to make sure that everybody who has a special talent is registered on a government database. And so he ends up finding out that his fiance is a shapeshifter, and he takes her in to be registered, and she's like, why would you do that? And it starts a whole big kerfuffle.
Betrayment.
Yes.
Is it on Earth or is it a different planet?
It's on Earth, but I didn't put it in, America necessarily. It's more just like modern first world civilization. And then I've been making up city names and like place names and making them kind of like a touchback on X-Men. Like there's a Scottsgate Bridge or something like that, named after Cyclops from X-Men. So I've been doing little things like that to make it to where it's a believable first world space, but trying to pin it somewhere specific was proving to be just like the biggest downer ever. I was like, man, I don't want to put this in like Kentucky or New York or some state I haven't been. It's just going to be in the wherever I decide it's going to be.
And I found, I don't know how other authors feel about that, but I did find that to be a problem with one of my novels. And I think it worked out okay because it was like a zombie apocalypse thing. And so like it doesn't really matter where you're at anyways, but I had a lot of locations of places that I'd never been in my entire life. And so it's like, well, we're not talking about the like geographical location. It's just so you know that everything's happening across the United States. And once I was done, I kind of realized like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. If I'm not knowledgeable on something, I probably shouldn't try and write about it until I am knowledgeable. So I'm glad I'm not the only one, because that I was really young and I didn't want to set it in the place where I was at for some reason. And now I'm like, I could have just done that and it probably would have been a little bit of a stronger environment, but that's what sequels are for, I guess.
Well, and there's like I'm in Appalachia in Kentucky, and I knew that I didn't want to base it anywhere in Kentucky because I've never met someone who reads like urban fantasy and is like, oh, I want to see what an urban fantasy is like set in Kentucky. Like nobody says that. They're like, I want to see it like in San Diego or San Francisco so you can blow up the Golden Gate Bridge or something. And so I decided, well, it'll be modern day, but it's going to be some made up town, like a Clarksville somewhere. You've seen The Simpsons, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like they live in Springfield, and it's like serious Simpson fandom conversation piece which Springfield they're in. And I'm like, they're not in a particular Springfield. And, my people aren't in a particular Clarksville. It's just Clarksville. It's Clarksville somewhere. And it's a college town because that's convenient for me.
What is the like the landscape of the city like? Is it like kind of like New York-y, or like more rural, or I guess like is it like deep in the heart of like a city, or is it somewhere like on the edge of the urban area?
So I spent a couple years at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and then I've been around the Eastern Kentucky University campus and also Berea College campus. And so I was like, okay, I want it to be a college town. So I'm just going to like take those three places and what I know them to look like and smush it together into this place where there's like a Madison Avenue and 3rd Street, and on a city grid. And then the government agency operates at some obscure bunker location off of a highway.
Nice. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What inspired this urban fantasy for you?
So I started writing a story when I was like 17 about this girl who was adopted. And I don't remember what book or movie or show it was that I watched where this orphan was like packing up their life, and it was a very angsty moment for them. And they were sort of being like pushed out because they were old enough that the orphanage was allowed to be like, yeah, go away, you're not our problem anymore. And I was like, I want to do something like that. So I started writing it. And that's where Trinity popped in. She was, was going to be an orphan from a particular orphanage and have this like mysterious backstory. And then I was like, well, I want to make it kind of romantic because I'm the kind of reader that if there's not a romance or friendship conflict kind of happening between the characters, then I just don't care. Like, I just don't care enough to read that book. So I was like, I want to make it kind of like a romance. And then I want to make it where she lives in an apartment above a coffee shop for some reason, because I like the idea of that setting. And then I was like, I also want her to be able to turn into a tiger. And I just kind of took it from there. It was like, yeah, that's where we're going.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So with the shape-shifting in particular, is it that shapeshifters can only shift into one particular thing and that's their only thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I one of the things that's got me kind of stumped right now is it's a huge tipping point for like the amount of power that each person has, for there to be somebody who can like turn into a tiger or turn into a lion, because then it's like, well, if you live in a world where people can turn into tigers and lions and wolves, what's the point in having people who are, telepathic or whatever? Because it that's one of the things that I'm thinking about maybe tweaking a little bit, because I also developed a changeling character, after I got some feedback on some super early drafts, and somebody was like, this kind of reminds me of X-Men. I was like, okay, I can roll with that. And so I was like, I want a changeling character then. And having those two to play with has been a lot of fun, but I've started to worry about the power shift that creates.
What 'cause as far as I know, I think I know what a changeling is, but will you explain that just in case I'm wrong and I don't want to say the wrong things?
So at least in this world that I built, it's a shapeshifter is someone who can change into a particular animal and only that animal. A changeling is someone who can change their physical appearance, but not change into a different creature altogether. So they can change like their hair color, their eye color, their bone structure. And that was, I decided to do that because I was like, that would be so fun to write a character who just changes what they look like all the time so they can get away with anything.
Glad I asked because from my fantasy standpoint, a changeling is an elven baby who took the place of a human baby at birth. So like literally has been swapped out, and that's why they're called changelings. So I'm glad that I asked because I would have been super wrong. Um, is that which parts are you frustrated with, if you don't mind me asking? As far as the writing aspect of the urban fantasy, is it the power dynamic that's got you like stalled out right now, or the relationship aspect of it? Oh no. Oh no. I don't know why or what's happening. Oh, okay. Your mic's not connected or something weird. I don't know what happened. Just been a day of technical difficulties, man. Well, I'll take this time to say thank you to the one person who happens to be with us right now. I think I know who that might be, but I might not know who that is. We back! I can't hear you, though. Huh. What just happened?
Hold on. Hopefully. It's ridiculous.
Okay, well, I can hear you again, so. What I had asked, I don't know if you could hear me or not, but I was just asking if it was the new power dynamic between like shapeshifters and changeling that has you stalled out, or if it was just the relationship issue between the Mrs. and Mr. Smith type of dynamic. Oh no. We tried something new because live streaming on Instagram was not a real easy way of doing it and getting it to the YouTube. And now I don't know what's going on. Why the microphone's not working.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, can I hear you though?
Can you hear me? You can't hear me? That's really weird.
This is so stupid. The audio testing works. Hold on.
This is really perfect. Can I watch this and...
Let me bounce out and then come back in.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we're talking with Katie Reed about her world building. For whatever reason, we're having technical difficulties. And, well, I can hear myself on the YouTubes, so let us... And... I knew it was Miss Me Meredith that had joined us over here. Thanks for the comments, love. Yeah, okay, so while we wait for Katie to come back, for Kat to come back, because I have to have her, she has to be here in order to add her back to the screen. It's really complicated trying to write something when you don't know what's going on, like where the location is, what the setting is, what the language is going to be, what the geography is going to be. Last month we talked to Elise Thornback about the world building through character design, as far as how your characters look determine what your storyline is going to entail, and how to not isolate and make one group of people bad because they look a certain way. And so world building has opened my eyes up as an author, And it's really amazing that we get to sit down and talk with people about the world building once a month. I'm just going to check and see if maybe Katie messaged me. No, she did not. Okay. So it's been, oh, hey, there we are. Hooray. So it's been an honor to be able to talk to other authors about world building because it changed my life so significantly. And I believe that all the authors watching need to employ some kind of world building, even if they're not doing like an urban fantasy or a sci-fi story. So now that she's back, we're going to go back and find out what's Stalin Cat on her story.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So, what I had asked was that, is it the power dynamic between the changeling and the shapeshifter that's kind of got you stalled right now, and that's where your frustration is? Or is it more with the relationship dynamic that you mentioned earlier?
So the relationship dynamic is going well enough, I think. There's just a few tweaks that I need to make to get that to do what I think it needs to do. But the frustration right now is the power dynamic between shapeshifters, changelings, and then this like miscellaneous category of people. Now, I'll say that I've been reading Vicious by V.E. Schwab this week, and she kind of does like a superhero, like extraordinary people type deal. And I've been looking at that and going, okay, well, maybe the power dynamic isn't as steep, like as complicated and convoluted as I feel like it is. But I'm strongly considering altering the whole shape-shifting deal.
That makes sense. Can I throw in my two cents?
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
Cool. I just don't want to like offer advice if whatever, but so from what I've gathered from any like superhero comic book or anything like that I've read, the way that I would look at it is every single person on the planet that we live on has different talents and powers anyways. So I wouldn't, if it was my book, I wouldn't necessarily look at it as like one is better than the other. I would look at it as like almost like the difference between like a Gemini and a Aries or a Pisces or something, like just the differences in personalities. But I don't know if that helps you any or not.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And one of the things that, again, Brandon Sanderson has the free online lectures, and I've watched way too much of them. But one of the things that he mentions, and one of the things that I think I need to fix with my magic system, you know, for what it's worth, is that he says it's not necessarily about what you can do with the power, but what you can't do with it. Because you're like, your job is to put your characters in a situation where they have to own it and fix it, you know. But if they can just turn into a 600-pound tiger and eat whatever the problem is, then, you know, that's... So I need to figure out how to stilt it a little bit. I need to figure out how to make it so that it's not exactly convenient to be a shapeshifter. Now, I do play up that whole, like, you can't exactly walk around in downtown wherever as a tiger and not draw attention, you know. So the secrecy is there. But once the secret is out, and that's the part that sort of, like, crashed into my idea and was like, oh crap, well, now that it's out, do we really care that there are shapeshifters around? Like, at that point, there are literally predatory animals walking the streets, so perhaps a little bit overpowered.
Yeah, I could see that. So when when one of your shapeshifters turns into like a lion or a tiger, can they still talk like a human, or is it like, okay, that actually I like that a lot, because then you're losing that ability to like communicate. So if you don't know that this person is this person, you're like, why is there a tiger? What's going on? And you can't.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So what why do people have these powers? Have you figured that out yet?
So, like on an iceberg level, at the very bottom of this iceberg is the fact that there's been some genetic modification happening on a government level that has, through genetics and people having children over time, developed a group of people who have, supernatural abilities. There, we'll just go with that. Preternatural, I think it was the word I was looking for.
I never would have guessed it. I was like, are you powers?
But yeah, and I'm not sure if the story is going to call for digging into that information, at least not in book 1. Mm-hmm. I could see it coming more into play in like book 2. But yeah, for book 1, it's very, very tip of the iceberg. But yeah, the reason everybody has power is because the government's been doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing, and that's why they want it shut down.
And that's why everybody's registered.
Yeah.
Got it. So what is your character development like? How do you, because I know when I was in high school, and I was in creative writing, there was a lot of different things where like, oh, well, you can interview your characters to really know who they are, or like build a character avatar sheet that explains like exactly what they look like. What is your process for that?
Well, so I've tried a few different things, and the thing that has felt most natural to me is to decide who is it that I want at the front of the story. What do they want? Why can't they have it? Because that establishes a motivation. And then from there, in that first draft phase, where Lindsay calls it warm-up writing, whenever you're kind of like, you're getting it down on paper, but you don't really know what you're doing yet. During that phase is when I tend to like write some arbitrary scene about the character doing a thing so that I can figure out like if their favorite cookie is a chocolate chip or a white chocolate chip macadamia nut or whatever. And it's not something that ever makes it into the book. It's like 1,000 pages or 1,000 words, not 1,000 pages. Jesus.
That would be a lot.
But it's like 1,000 words on what this character does in a day, or why they like their motorcycle, or, their experience going through the foster systems or something like that. And it doesn't necessarily make it into the book in the depth that I write it at that point. But that's how I get to know my characters, is I have to put them on the page first. I used to do a lot of like just internal in my head, like talking to my characters in my head, I guess, kind of way. And I think it changed over time because I have more things preoccupying my brain now. So I just don't have enough room to hold on to all the stuff that's going on here unless I'm actually physically writing it down. And then whenever I was younger, in middle school and high school, and writing stories, my characters were literally just me saying, okay, you, friend, I'm going to pluck you up. I'm going to put you in this story, and I'm going to make you a werewolf and see what happens. So
again, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I had to severely separate myself from my writing, because I was like, I'm the main character of my life. Why don't I just be the main character of all these stories? And then I was like, oh, because that's not diverse or sustainable or like anything people want to read. So That's
I think
neat.
that's something that ends up showing through in the writing too, because you'll have things that pop up that's like the narrator telling the reader something because it's what the writer is thinking at the time and it's what they would have been, doing in that moment. But I think by taking a character and saying, this is their motivation, that gives me just enough to work with that I can create a new person, based largely off of people watching and people that I know. And, if I know you, you're going to get written into a book. It's going to happen. You're not going to have an entire character based off of you, but, that little pin clicky thing that you do is going to go in the book, or the fact that you have 12 cats is going to go in the book, or these things in real life that you can't really make up. If you tack it onto a character, it can be a really satisfying way of character building. And I found that the character sheet approach made it too impersonal for me, and it made it to where I was like, okay, so I have this like little doll that I'm moving around on the thing now, but I don't actually know why they're here. I just know what they look like and what their favorite color is. And
it's kind of how I felt about it, because it, like you said, it's just like real surface level, and you're like, great, she has pink hair, but why and when did that happen and all this different stuff. So that's a beautiful approach. Do your characters ever, well, first of all, do you write in first person or third person?
I prefer to write in third person. Yeah. But I'm also someone who has a really hard time sticking to one perspective, which, that can be a hard time for readers. Sometimes I've had several readers say, with the urban fantasy, they're like, the point of view changes too much. And I'm like, yeah, I get how that's like not your preference, but I dislike writing in first person because then you have to rely so much on misunderstanding and miscommunication. At least in my experience, when I've written in first person, I felt like I've leaned a lot on that, miscommunication, misinterpretation of somebody rolling their eyes at something, because you're stuck in that one person's head. And I get bored with it. If I'm stuck in one person's head for too long, I'm like, I don't even care how your story ends anymore. I'm more interested in what that person's doing. So
I'm glad I'm not the only one again. And I think the more of us who do that, because Elise does that too. Every even if the chapters are really long, it'll be broken up by like, this is one person's perspective, this is another person's perspective, and not everybody's gonna enjoy that. But I think the more of us who start doing that, maybe the better it'll be received, because that's something that I'm surprised that more people aren't into, what with the like TikTok ADD generation of like,
yeah.
I'd so much rather read a book that's kind of like a string of short stories that are all related to each other and create this bigger story than just read one book beginning to end about one person and their one perspective and their one experience. So that, yeah. I think being able to hop from different perspectives, even though it's all in third person, is the mark of I don't want to say stronger, but just like on a linear level, just a different kind of writer. Mm-hmm. And it shows as like a really strong craft, in my opinion. So
yeah, well, and I think a lot of it too is, and whenever you're an author, it is no secret to anyone how many books there are, how many writers there are, how many people want to read what kinds of books, and how many people don't like certain tropes, and how many people can't stand or absolutely can't have a book without certain things. And I'm a believer in that we're really good at writing what we read. And I know that whenever I'm reading a book, I like head hopping a little bit. I like to know what the other person's thinking. I like to know what, one of my characters is doing over here while another character is doing over here, so that I can make a clash in the middle and have that, expose of sorts. I know it's not for a lot of readers, but I know a lot of readers who read books that are strictly in first person. And I know that for me, like, I don't mind to read first person every once in a while, but if I get to choose whether or not I'm going to read story A in first person or in third person, I'm going to be like, write that in third person because that's what I want to see. Yeah. So I think your reading preferences move over into your writing, I think, a lot of the time. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's okay because knowing yourself as a reader is going to help you get to know your readers better and to understand your readers better as well.
So the reason why I asked is because I've seen a lot of memes on the Instagrams about like, oh, when a character takes over and surprises you and you're like writing and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I wasn't expecting that to happen. That happens to me all the time. How does that present to you?
Well, it happens to me sometimes. And when it does, I'm always happy about it. But again, with how I do the character development and I start out with that motivation, usually that's the thing that's actually driving my character building. So I know why they did it. I just didn't necessarily know that this was how it was going to come about. It's like, way to go, Trenton. That was very creative of you. It doesn't feel like I thought about it. It feels like I was writing the thing and this was the most practical thing for him to do. And so that's what he did. And it's like, oh, okay, that's how that's going to work.
How much outlining do you do? Because I know Elise, we will text back and forth and she's like, I finished an outline. And I'm like, I finished a first draft. I'm pretty sure like my version of a first draft is probably your version of an outline. Right. So how much planning do you put into it before you actually sit down with the first draft?
I have a really weird hybrid method with my plotting, and I will go through and I'll write out an outline. And I got to tell you, the first time I did an outline, I was so pissed off at myself because I was like, I completely wasted all that time. This story isn't about that outline at all. It's not even the same book anymore. So I started doing this thing where like I'll outline and I'll decide, here's my beginning. I know how I want it to end. And then I want these things to happen in the middle. And then I'll go through and say, okay, how do I get from here to here? And how do I get from here to here? And then after I get a super rough skeleton of that down, I have, I go and like separate out different, sections, and I'll do like, these are the different settings and these are the different characters. And these are like some scene ideas that I have that I don't necessarily know how they're going to work in there, but they would be a lot of fun to write. So, scribble down a note real fast. And then once I start drafting and I start getting from point A to B to C to D, I might go in and say, okay, well, so Trenton decided that he wasn't going to take this particular path, or I just couldn't write it around to this particular way of doing things. Or if I'm drafting and I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't work because it breaks one of the rules that I've set for myself. Then I'll just go into my outline and I'll change the outline so that I have like it helps me kind of like catalog the novel as I'm going. So that whenever I reach a point where I'm like, how did I handle that? How did that person end up, how did we get here? I can go to the outline and say, oh, yeah, okay, because this, and this, instead of going back and reading the chapters. Because I can tell you that for me as a writer, going back to read it before I finished it is not a good idea. I have to write it from start to finish without going back and reading it, because otherwise I'll be like, but what if I did this? Or what if I changed this? Or what if I did this different color hair? And I start getting caught up in the things that don't matter. But yeah, I kind of do a blend of plotting and then discovery writing in which my outline will change as the story does. And then sometimes I'll have a situation where it's like, man, I just wrote this whole scene that doesn't even make any sense. This isn't even going anywhere. And I'll take that out, and because I'm anal retentive, I will put it at the very bottom of a document under a header that says deleted scenes, because I can't bring myself to just completely delete it and get rid of it. I'm like, I might be able to use that later.
It would almost, it's almost tempting to like, what if you compiled a book of all your deleted scenes and it's just like a bonus companion book of nonsense? Seemingly nonsense. If some random person was to pick it up and that was the first book you were read, you'd be like, what is this? But like for the fans, it'd be like, this is fantastic. It almost because the more that I take notes on what I'm writing, the more I want to like publish the notes and do the like J.K. Rowling thing where it's like, oh, but what about the Fantastic Beasts and where to find them and all this other extra stuff. So, do you keep a book of notes on like who your characters are, the outline and everything, or is everything on the computer right from the get-go?
Oh no. So usually how it works is I have a notebook, and I've got one going right now for a high fantasy that I want to write. And it's like literally shower thoughts, you know, it's like, what if orcs had horns, and what if ogres weren't dumb, and maybe the gnomes are going to do something cool, and I want the elven sea captain to always have a hat, you know, like random stuff. And that will slowly start to build into, it'd be cool if I had a scene, like scene where mage does thing that makes other people say, what the heck? And all of that, once I start getting that down on paper and it starts to become full scenes in my head, then I'll go over to the computer and say, okay, these are all the pieces that I have to work with. Now what? And that's when I sit down and start typing. Because if I try to do it on the computer, there's something about sitting down to type something, like my brain will just go somewhere weird. Like it just completely off the rails. I have to have something that I have put down on paper and like brainstormed out and scratched out and drawn arrows on and circled this and said next page and you know, big question mark at the top. Does this even mean anything? You know? Yeah. It's kind of like workshopping it in a notebook. And then I go to the computer and I'm like, okay, let's see if we can make this like actually intelligible so that other people can understand what I'm saying. Because I'm convinced that if somebody ever picks up one of my writing notebooks, they're gonna be like, what the hell does this even mean?
It's just like swirly lines and question marks and arrows, and they're like, I don't, do you need to go see somebody?
Right, yeah. And it's like, this isn't even sequential. I know it's not sequential, okay? Like,
don't worry about it.
It's supposed to be.
So, you mentioned the high fantasy idea, and I am, like, I don't know why. I have no idea why. Maybe it's just because of like adding extra magic to our reality, or maybe it's just because I'm intimidated by the work of people such as like J.K. Rowling and J.R.R. Tolkien. But what all goes into creating a high fantasy versus an urban fantasy? Because I know they're completely different things, even though they are both fantasy.
Yeah. So with an urban fantasy, what I've found is that it's a lot easier to generalize my setting at the start. You know, at the beginning of Trinity's story, I was like, okay, I want a bakery. I want it to be in a college town. I want there to be a bunker that's outside of town somewhere. Like there's interstate access, of course, so at some point in, you know, the road. And I can say things like the character rode a motorcycle through an alleyway and there were dumpsters, and people are going to know, like they're going to have that visual in their head because those are the movies that we watch. Those are the books that we read. Those are the roads that we walk on. You know, you say sidewalk and brick house and people are going to picture maybe a few things a little bit differently, but whenever it's that grounded, it's a lot easier to just say, it was a sidewalk and a brick house. Okay, now time to move on. But with a high fantasy world, I'm finding that I need to do a lot more world building backstage before I ever put, you know, fingers to keys or pens to paper. Because I'm thinking about things like, what do the water currents do? And what does that do to the weather? And how does that affect land masses? And how does that affect growth? And do they have trees in these particular parts of the world? Where is a desert? Are there deserts? You know, like you're literally creating a globe at that point. And so At least to me. I mean, I know that everybody doesn't get that in depth with it. There are a lot of people who just keep it super open. Peter S. Beagle in The Last Unicorn, you didn't get a map. There weren't explanations of why the unicorns lived next to lakes other than it's what the unicorns like to do. But for me, again, my preference as a reader is to understand why there is a tornado circling the globe, or why is it cold in this place and warm in this place? And how does that affect the agriculture? And how does that affect what people eat? Like what drinks do they have in this part of the world that they wouldn't in this part of the world because of the different kinds of things that grow? So it's so much more in depth, but in my opinion, it's a lot more fun. And that's kind of why I decided to be like, I think I'm going to put the urban fantasy aside for now and just let myself wander around in this fantasy world for a little while, because I too often find myself being like, but there's not enough magic in this one.
It's understandable. So when you talk about like what grows in what region, are you planning on creating fantasy crops, or those like, like corn, apples, carrots, potatoes, whatever? How far into the world building are you getting?
I'm going pretty far down the rabbit hole right now.
Woot!
Even like with the gnomes and fantasies and orcs and stuff, I was like, how much of that vocabulary do I want to actually use? And as far as creatures go, I was like, I don't really want there to be like chickens necessarily, but maybe people eat pheasants instead, and they'll maybe not be called pheasants, but they'll have a different name and have a tail like a peacock or something, So I kind of want to go all out with it. Now, I might get into that and realize, you know what, I'm doing this instead of actually writing the story, so maybe I should stop and actually go write the story now. But right now I'm having a lot of fun, like with playing with the map and deciding whether it's warm or cold in these specific places, what kind of sea life is going on. Do they even know what the entire world looks like yet, or are they still in an exploratory phase of humanity? Yeah, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, but I'm going to make it look a lot different.
Yeah. That's my favorite though. It really like and that's again why it's like, well, the more notes I write, the more I just want to publish my notes and like give the reader full access to what went into it, is because the more in depth you go and the more things you create, it like becomes a more immersive experience, and it's not just like something they can skim through and be like, oh, okay, like I already know this, even though it's in a different setting. That's really cool though. When did that idea come to you? How recently was that?
So I don't remember why, but at some point my husband and I were like sitting and watching YouTube, and I was like, man, Siege at the Harbor would be a really cool name for a book. What would that book be about? And I was like, we're just going to put elves and orcs in there. Yeah, we're going to have elves and orcs. Might as well have gnomes too. So that was 100% what that was. I was like, that would be cool. How do I make it cooler?
It's amazing. That's what writing's all about, is creating worlds and expounding upon the things that interest us. So that makes a ton of sense. So you cut off for about 10 minutes, so I was going to keep going for another 10 minutes. But the big thing I want to know, especially because you've been in this for 7 years, is what advice you would have for anybody watching who is, really interested in writing, but they're really nervous about starting. Maybe they're even like concerned about not being good, and that can be a matter of, practice or confidence depending on what's going on. But what would your advice be for those people?
My advice would be writing feels like a solitary job. And I know that for me, that solitude is a lot of the perks. Like, I am not an extroverted person. I am just as happy to sit in a corner and read a book at a party as I am to sit and have drinks with somebody. But keeping it to yourself is the worst thing you can do, because if you don't let other people read what you're writing, even if it's crap, even if it's absolute crap on paper, if you don't let anybody read it and give you constructive feedback, okay, like, don't make friends with assholes who are going to be jerks, but show people what you're writing. Tell people that you're writing. Tell people that you're writing stories. Let people who are interested in them read them and cheer you on. The urban fantasy that I was writing, Lindsay read a super early draft of it, and it was so nice to have someone read it and then tell me what they liked about it and then tell me what was missing. And like, that was the point at which I said, okay, this is how I take my writing to the next level. I've been writing in notebooks and on computers for years, but unless you're letting other people read what you write and you're allowing yourself to take that constructive feedback and use it to grow as an author, that's the part where you're going to find the most growth for yourself.
So, as far as finding a support system, do you know Lindsay in person, or is it like a internet thing? You know her in person?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So we used to live in the same neighborhood. We had a mutual friend who introduced us because I told our mutual friend that I like to write, and she was like, I have a friend who's an author, and I was like, what? No way. And so Lindsay and I met at our mutual friend's daughter's birthday or something like that. Like, we were both there. And we all had kids the same age, so we got together pretty often because we all lived in the same neighborhood. And even whenever Lindsay moved further away, she's still somebody that, you know, we'll message each other on Facebook and be like, hey, does this sound too weird? Or like, I'm having an existential author crisis, help me. And she'll, you know, say something like, it's okay, it happens, or, you know, you're doing a great job. So
that's amazing. Did you ever have the stage fright, so to speak, of sharing, like, the first time you were like, can you read this for me? Was it like terrifying, or were you like super confident in it?
The first time that I ever asked someone to read one of my stories was when I asked my dad, and he read it, and I was terrified of what he was going to say. And then he was like, this is really good. You're not finished with it, but this is really good, and you should keep going. The first time that I ever had someone outside of my family read my writing, I handed it over and then hid, because I was like, I don't even know why I just did that. Can't even take it back. Can't even sneak into their house and take it back because I sent it in an email. So it's gone now. So yeah, it was terrifying. It was scary. And it is scary because your writing is really close to you. It's, you know, it's part of you, just like a person who paints because they have it within them to do so. And you're taking a part of yourself and putting it out there for other people to see. And it is scary. But if you find people who are going to be positive without being, I don't want to say overly positive, but like, you got to find people who are going to tell you what's missing as much as they're going to tell you what you're doing right. So if you find the right people, and I feel like most people are well-intentioned when it comes to reading someone else's writing, then it's a super gratifying feeling, and it makes you feel like you're making progress instead of existing in a bubble, nobody reading it, and you just being like, I don't even know. Like, let somebody read it. It's scary, but it'll be okay.
So then, what do you do now? Are you collecting, that's a weird word. Are you connecting with beta readers, like, through social media, or is it still people who you know personally?
So I've found a couple of subreddits where you can look for beta readers and other writers to help you critique your work. I've looked in Facebook writing groups. I've asked on Twitter. I put it out in my newsletter. I ask Lindsay and Michelle, like, hey, y'all know anybody that feels like maybe reading a book for me? And they might be like, yeah, this person. So to find a good mix of beta readers, I feel like you have to go to multiple sources, and they need to be at least partially strangers, because with a beta read, what you really need is a fly on the wall view of what your readers are thinking whenever they're reading your book.
I love that. I love that so much, because I know, and leading into the next question, which is what do you do for your covers, like your book covers? But the reason why I asked that is because when I started publishing, all my friends and family bought a copy of my first book, and they were like, oh, it's great, which is, you know, fantastically supportive, and I love all my friends and my family, and they did a really good job. But then I can't even remember where I posted it on Reddit, but I posted the book cover, and I had like hand drawn it. I thought it was going to be my brand to hand draw covers, and I do not have strong drawing skills at all. It really looked like a 5-year-old made the cover, and somebody on Reddit was kind enough, and when I tell people about it, they think it was horrible, but I say they were kind enough to be like, your artwork on your cover isn't strong enough. Nobody's going to buy this book. And it hurt really badly, because I had taken the time to write the book, to draw a cover to go with the story inside, and I put all of my heart into it. And then this one person was like, that's why nobody's buying your book. And so I promptly changed it. I actually had Elise do the cover for the book that I reprinted, and it is so much stronger. It's just so much stronger. And without that input of people who don't know you, who have no reason to try to avoid to hurt your feelings, you'll never know how you can improve, because a lot of time, well-intentioned people who are really close to you just don't want to hurt your feelings. So what do you do for your book covers?
So for both Dragon Keeper Academy, well, so this one we actually had designed by, oh, I'm not going to be able to remember who it is. Maybe we put it in the front. But we had this one designed by someone, Sleepy Fox Studios, and she did a really cute job. And then this one was actually a pre-made, and maybe from Clever Fox Studios too, even. But this one was a pre-made cover, and the way that we handled it was that Lindsay and, okay, so this one is Rocking book covers. We split the bill 3 ways to pay for the covers. I know that I will always need someone else to do my covers. I am not a visual person at all. I'm a little bit weird that way, because if you say red apple, it's like, okay, I know what an apple is, I know what red is, but like I don't have a picture for that in my head. Like I don't, and like I can doodle it. It's not like I'm completely incapable of, visually representing an apple. But I am not a visual person at all. So I will always be going to other people to do my covers. To anyone who doesn't have an extensive budget, I would say to look at pre-made covers, because you can find a lot of really pretty pre-made covers, and they're not going to be your like ideal custom dream or anything. But most of the people who are designing book covers know not only what looks good on a book, but like, for example, this one was a choice that we made together because we were like, yeah, that looks great. But then this one, we said, it's a Dragon Academy book, and it's an anthology. And that person said, okay, well, this is the kind of cover that's doing really well right now in that genre. So unless you are yourself a book cover designer, I would say buy a book cover. Now, as far as what you did with your book cover, I think it's perfectly okay to have a passion project and put it together the way that you want it to be put together, because that's what you want your project to look like. That's great. And I have a lot of respect for projects like that. But if you're looking at this and you're saying, I want to make a career as an indie author, work with a book cover designer. You can find someone that you can afford. You can find someone who can work with you, and your book is going to do a lot better as a result.
I'm just going to pull this up if I have it on my computer to kind of highlight the difference, because the covers that you showed were significantly beautiful. Like that, it's an anthology of fairy tale retells, right? That one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that is a really good example of, like, just like you said, just spend a few extra moments of your time. Oh, I don't have it. That's silly. You know, paying for something that is actually professional, and then you don't end up looking like a 6-year-old drew your... it is so bad. I'm a little embarrassed, but it's like a beautiful story. I'll have to show them when I do my my solo episode, because it really does look like if an 8-year-old drew it, it's fantastic. But as a 20-something-year-old writing new adult fiction, trying to get other adults to read it, it was not happening. So that's I was really curious in that, because I know Elise designs her own covers, but she's definitely got like the visual eye to do so. So I'm glad that I asked, because that's the other part of like doing the author thing, or anything really, is just to not feel like you have to take everything on your own, because that's really isolating and doesn't set you up for success at all. So
right. Yeah. And you know, it as an independent author, you still have the control to say, you know, no, I don't want the dragon on the cover to be black, I want it to be yellow, or don't want there to be a girl on the cover, just wants there to be a dragon or whatever. And the book designers the book cover designers will work with you. But I think it's important to understand that I'm trying to look for a good example here, like book covers like this, you know, like this was an entire marketing team that said, this is the genre, this is the one that sells, this is what the book needs to look like as released. And I think this one is actually maybe a UK release, but I could really talk all day about covers, because it's really important to understand that to sell books, you have to have an understanding of market, and it's okay to not have that understanding of market. As long as you're willing to let someone else design your book cover who is familiar with the market. Because, you know, even though I'm a person who I might see a cover and say, it's not the best, I'm going to still turn it over and see like what the back of the book says. Your average book buyer is not going to do that. If you don't get them with the cover, then they're going to keep going. And a book cover designer is going to be able to help you accomplish that.
I wonder how much of the, like, at least for me anyways, I guess I can't speak for anybody else, but I wonder how much of that misconception of like, well, your book cover doesn't matter, is because don't judge a book by its cover is like a big theme in our society. And it's like, well, yes, when it comes to people, you definitely don't want to judge a book by its cover and like assume that somebody in rags is like a homeless person. They might be the wealthiest person in the world. At the same time, as you just said, that is literally how we judge our books, is by the covers.
Yes.
Yeah. Figured it was.
I mean, there have been books that I have bought because of the cover, without even knowing what it was, you know, what it was about. Actually, this book right here.
Oh,
Right? I saw
wanna
it on
read that.
Amazon. It was $7.99, and I was like, I'm buying that just for the cover. Don't even care what it's about. Also, it's a really fun read, and you should read it. But yeah, I was like, that cover is gorgeous. I want that on my bookshelf. So,
Gosh,
yeah,
I don't want to leave, but I need to go eat really badly. It's like lunchtime. It's past lunchtime in Montana. But thank you so much for being here. How I didn't even think of asking Elise when we were on stream, but how can people like support you? Where can they buy your books, and how should they follow you on your socials?
So I am everywhere in socials as KD Reid, REID author. That's my Instagram, that's my Twitter, that's my Facebook. I have a YouTube channel called KD Reads Books, REIDS, and yes, I'm cheeky.
I love it. I love it so much.
And then kdreadauthor.com is my website. You can buy my books on there, and you can sign up for my newsletter.
Woot! Well, thank you so much for spending your Sunday with me, Katie, and we will resume in September, I guess, because I'm doing the solo thing in August. Yeah. So it's I feel like this could just go on and on forever, and I'm really excited to get the group of us together and just really have a think tank about world building. So
yeah, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you have a great rest of your day. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.